South of Westeros and Essos, a large archipelago called the Summer Isles separates two warm seas, the Summer Sea and the Sunset Sea. The northernmost islands of the group have been mapped, 38 out of approximately 50 said to exist, but it is not known how far south the island chain extends. The mapped portion of the chain includes 3 large islands and numerous smaller ones. A man could walk across the smaller ones in an hour, but Chala, largest of the isles, stretches 200 leagues from tip to tip, containing green mountains and vast forests, steaming jungles and white and black sand beaches, roaring rivers filled with crocodiles, and fertile valleys. 2 of the valleys are settled. Red Flower Vale, that was the seat of Chalapar in the Summer Isles before he went into exile, and Sweet Lotus Vale, where the port city of Ebonhead is located. Valano and Umboru are each less than half as large as Chala, though either of the two is still larger than all of the Stepstones combined. While Chala is the largest island, Valano is the most populous, as it contains 3 cities, Last Lament, with its great harbor, Sleepy Lotus Point, and Tall Trees Town, where priestesses carve histories and laws into the talking trees. These 3 islands are home to more than 9/10 of the Summer Islanders. The rest are scattered throughout the half a dozen of the smaller islands that are large enough to support sizable populations and prominently appear on maps. The Summer Islanders are black of hair and eye, ebony-skinned handsome people, tall, strong, graceful, and quick to learn. They speak their own language and often wear capes of brightly colored feathers. Flowers of 1,000 different sorts bloom on the Summer Isles, filling the air with their perfume. Myriads of brightly colored birds fly in between the fruit trees. Rainforests are full of spotted panthers larger than any lion and packs of lean red wolves. Monkeys swing through the branches of the trees above. Each of the 3 big islands contains its own native ape species. The old red man apes on Umboru, silver pelts in the mountains of Chala, and night stalkers on Valano. The Summer Isles have a long history dating back thousands of years. Much of this was recorded in carvings made by priestesses on the famous talking trees of Tall Trees Town. Even more is recorded in oral tradition because the Summer Islanders rely heavily upon histories recorded in highly complicated formal verse. The Summer Islanders lived in isolation from the rest of mankind, and they were apparently unaware that other lands even existed. Maps included in the ancient histories carved into the talking trees depict only the Summer Islands themselves, surrounded by a world-encompassing ocean. The first recorded contact between the Summer Isles and the outside world occurred between 8 and 5,000 years ago, when the Giscari Empire was at its height. A Giscari merchant ship was blown off course by a storm and landed on Valano, but the crew took the natives for demons with skins burned black by the fires of hell. Thus, later Giscari stayed away from the Demon Isle, as they named Valano on their charts. Although this was no real meeting, the contact had a profound impact upon the Summer Islanders, introducing to them the idea that there were other lands beyond their home waters. So as their curiosity was awakened, the princes of the Isles began building larger and sturdier ships capable of making long sea voyages. The greatest of these was Maltar Xuk, prince of the smaller island of Kaj, who is remembered as Maltar the Windrider and Maltar the Mapmaker. A great new era of exploration and trade began. The Summer Islanders first encountered the peaceful inhabitants of Nav to their east, then the Basilisk Isles, and the northern coast of Sothoryos as well as the southern coast of Essos and Westeros. Merchant ships from the Summer Islands may have reached Old Town generations before the Andals, or even the first man did. Some maesters speculated that Old Town may have first risen in the Dawn Age, as a trading post where ships from Valyria, Old Gis, and the Summer Isles would put in to replenish their supplies and trade with each other and even the elder races. Thousands of years later, famous traveler Lamas Longstrider, during his stay on Summer Isles, recorded that the sages of the Isles claimed that their ancestors once took the seas in oared coracles and enlargers with their ships with sails of woven hemp, and reached the shores of Sothoryos and even founded cities there, but they were later overwhelmed and destroyed by the same forces that brought down later Valyrian and Giscari settlements there, particularly plagues, dangerous wildlife, and attacks by the savage brindled man of the interior. If these accounts are true, It was so long ago that no visible ruins of these settlements remain, their sites perhaps reclaimed by the jungles. Within less than half a century of their first contact, the Summer Islands had established a thriving trade network with the Valyrian freehold. Since the Summer Islands are poor in metals, but rich in gemstones, spices, hardwoods, and tropical animals highly valued by Valyrians, a busy trade routes were established between the two. A fashion developed amongst the dragon lords for monkeys, apes, panther cubs, and parrots, along with palm wine, fruit, and feathers. The Valyrians never made any attempt to conquer the Summer Islands though, probably because at the time Valyria was still an upstart power, fighting with the Giscari Empire to their east, and later they were focused on the conflict with the Rhoynar to their west. Yet it did not take long after establishing trade with the Valyrians for some princes of the Summer Islands to learn that the Dragon Lords would also offer them handsome payments of gold for slaves. Princes began to sell captured foes and defeated rivals to passing slavers. Summer Islanders soon became a favored target for slavers from Valyria, Old Gis, and the Basilisk Isles, as well as various pirates. Rapid coastal raids would carry off entire villages into bondage. Far more were sold into slavery by the princes of the isles themselves, fueling a round of internal wars in which each prince tried to capture more of their enemies to sell into slavery. For this reason, the histories carved into the talking trees refer to this time period as the Years of Shame, and it lasted for the better part of 2 centuries until a warrior woman named Xanda Ko, princess of Sweet Lotus Vale, who had herself been enslaved for a time, united all the islands under her rule and made an end to it. Because iron was scarce and costly on the islands, armor was little known, and the long thrusting spears and short stabbing spears traditional amongst the Summer Islanders had proved of little worth against the steel swords and axes of the slavers. Xanda Ko armed her sailors with tall bows made of golden heart, a wood found only on Jhala and Omboru. These great bows far outranged the recurved bows of horn and sinew the slavers carried, and were capable of firing yard-long shafts of hardwood so forcefully that they would penetrate even the steel plate armor. Xanda Ko also had new large and sturdy ships designed, known as swan ships, for the long necks of their prows, to provide high platforms for archers to fire upon approaching slaver ships. Led by Xanda's daughter and eventual successor, Chatana Ko, known as Arrow of Chahar, Summer Islanders prevailed in what came to be known as the Slavers' Wars. Slavery has been strictly outlawed in the Summer Islands ever since. Unfortunately, Princess Chatanaka's future was not so bright. She wed unwisely and did not reign as well as she had thought. The unity that the islands had known under Chatana and her mother did not survive her death. By the end of the wars, less than 3 centuries had passed since the Summer Islands had their first contact with the outside world. Given that the Giscari Empire was at its height when the first contact occurred, and Old Gis was destroyed by the Valyrians 5,000 years ago, Xanda and Chatana Ko must have lived at least that long ago. Yet, her and her mother's legacy lives. Slavers even now will flee at the sight of a swan ship, for each of those carry a complement of archers armed with golden hard bows. The Bowmen of the Summer Isles are known as finest in the known world, and since the princes of the Isles have forbidden the export of golden heart wood since the Slavers' Wars, none other bow can match those made in the Summer Isles, except for dragonbone bows, and those are exceedingly rare. Throughout their history to the present day, the Summer Islands have only been united under a single ruler about half a dozen times, and never for long. Instead, each of the smaller islands has its own ruler, each bearing a title translated into the common tongue as prince or princess. The 3 main islands are large enough to contain several rival princedoms. Summer Islanders are used to defending themselves, but they are not a warlike people, so their rulers have never set out on external conquests or taken part in foreign wars. For this reason, the islands do not prominently enter into the wider histories of wars in Westeros and Essos. Yet, rare internal wars do happen on the Summer Isles. Such wars are highly ritualized, with battles that resemble tourney melees, wherein bands of warriors meet on battlefields chosen in advance. They do not use golden hard bows in these fights, since their gods have forbidden that. Such wars seldom last longer than a day, and are harmless to everyone except the warriors themselves. Even the defeated princes suffer neither death nor disfigurement, though they must leave their homes and palaces to spend the remainder of their days in exile. Some years after Robert's rebellion, there was a civil war on Chala, which saw Prince Chalapharksov of the Red Flower Vale deposed. He sought refuge in King's Landing, and spent many years petitioning King Robert Baratheon for military assistance in retaking his homeland. Robert was attracted by the idea of invading the Summer Islands, but his advisors convinced him it was a foolhardy venture. Despite this negative response, Xo remains in exile in King's Landing and is constantly present at court. Summer Islanders prefer trade and exploration to conquest, so swan ships from the Summer Islands can be found in ports such as Old Town, King's Landing, Braavos, and Karf. Merchant ships from the rest of the world also visit the Summer Islands. Even Ibanese whaling ships from the far north of the Shivering Sea are known to put in at ports as far south as the Summer Isles. Numerous individual Summer Islanders have also set out for the wider world to seek their fortunes as mercenary bowmen and sell sails, some becoming pirates in the Basilisk Isles. Others have risen high among the sellsword companies in the disputed lands, as professional pit fighters in Slaver's Bay and as guardsmen in their retinues of merchant princes in the free cities. One such sellsword captain was Xobar Chokwa, an exiled prince from the Summer Isles, who was one of the infamous Band of Nine during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. About 1,000 years ago, at the end of the last of the Rhoynish Wars, Princess Nymeria led the surviving Rhoynar in a voyage across the ocean to escape from the Valyrians. They did not immediately arrive in Dorne, as it is told in many stories. After briefly stopping in the Basilisk Isles and attempting to settle in Sothoryos for almost a year, Nymeria and her followers fled once again due to the harsh local conditions. They wandered for another year and visited Naath, but later left due to the local butterfly disease. At this point, Nymeria and the remaining Rhoynar refugees tried to settle in the Summer Islands. The princes of the Isles refused to allow them to settle on any of the main free islands for fear of provoking the wrath of the Dragon Lords. Instead, Nymeria and her followers settled on the small desolate island Tabulu, located northeast of Valano. Because most of Nymeria's refugees were female, Abulu became known as the Isle of Women, a name it still bears. The island was already small, and its thin and stony soil could not possibly yield enough to feed them all, so many starved. Nymeria and her followers stayed on Abulu for 2 years, but hunger, disease, and slavery raids continued to take their toll. Ultimately, she chose to set out once again with her people to find a new home, and sailing north, they landed in Dorne. Several thousand of her followers chose to stay, however, and their descendants have lived on the Isle of Women up to the present day. There are some smaller isles worthy of mention. The Singing Stones have jagged peaks so riddled with holes and airways that they make a strange music when the wind blows. The people of the stones can tell which way the wind is blowing from the sound of their song. Stonehead is plainly the work of men. The north face of the rock has been carved in the likeness of some forgotten god. His look is the last that the Summer Islanders see as they sail north to Westeros. Koj, once home to Maltar the Mapmaker, still boasts the finest shipyards in the archipelago. Most of the islanders' famed swan ships are built on Koj, and the Pearl Palace, seat of the Princess of Koj, is renowned for its collection of charts and maps. Though many gods are honored on the Summer Isles, a special reverence is shown to the god and goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. By joining together in the act of worship, men and women give honor to the gods who made them. All Summer Islanders, no matter rich or poor, male or female, of high birth or low, are expected to dwell for a time in the temples of love, sharing their bodies. Most serve the gods in the temple for no more than a year, but those deemed the best in their serving remain. In other lands they might be called whores or courtesans, but on the Summer Islands they are called priests. Fearless mariners, crews of the swan ships explore new horizons endlessly. There are indications that explorers from Summer Islands may have mapped the western coast of Sothoryos to the very bottom of the world, but hid it from the rest of the known world. If they did so, then maybe they had a reason, since Summer Islanders are an overall peaceful nation. Maybe they got scared, or greedy, thus they decided to keep that information to themselves. Or maybe these indications are nothing but fantasies, and all of the explorers simply did not return from their voyages. Only the princes of the Summer Islands and the crews of the explorers' ships may know the truth, but they remain silent. It has been known about the vast lands to the south since men first went to explore the seas in ships. Giscari believed the continent to be as large as Westeros, and Carfine maps showed the continent as an island twice the size of Great Modoc, but their ships never managed to find the bottom of the continent. Jainara Belaris, a dragon rider from Valyrian Freehold, once flew her dragon Terox farther south than any person ever, and found only jungle, deserts, and mountains. After 3 years, she returned to the Freehold to report the continent was as large as Essos, a land without end. Or so she stated at least, because flying away alone for 3 years to explore lands unknown sounds a lot like a great excuse for shady business. On the northern coast of the continent lie a score of small trade towns of mud, described as wet, humid, and full of misery, where adventurers, rogues, and whores from the 3 cities and the 7 kingdoms go seeking fortune. Pirates prey on these settlements, carrying off captives to the Isle of Tears, before selling them to the flesh markets of Slavers Bay, or the pleasure houses of Lys. The Giscari established outposts on the northern shores of the continent back in the days of the Old Empire. They raised the walled city Zamatar at the mouth of the river Zamoyos, and built the grim panel colony Gorosh on Wyvern Point. The walled city was captured by the dragon lords of the Valyrian Freehold during the Fourth Giscari War. Now Zamatar lays in ruins, so is the Gorosh. Though before giving up to the jungle, Zamatar was settled for the last time by none other but Nymeria and her people. After refusing the offer of the pirate kings of the Basilisk Isles to settle at the Isle of Toads, in exchange of a yearly tribute of 30 virgin girls and pretty boys, Princess Nymeria and the Rhoynar settled on Zamatar, which had been abandoned already for 1,000 years. Nymeria remained there with the ships, while some of her people made their way upriver to Yin. Despite the riches to be found on Sothoryos, Nymeria abandoned Zamatar and returned to the sea when the ships sent to explore other ancient city did not return. The origins of Yin are one of the greatest mysteries of the known world. Just like many other ancient structures of unknown origin, Yin is built entirely of oily black stone, in blocks so large it would require a dozen elephants to move them. City had remained in desolation for many thousands of years, yet the jungle surrounding it has scarce touched it. When Nymeria went to Yin to see by herself what had happened to her people, she found that all Rhoynish settlers had vanished from the city. According to tales, Nymeria called it a city so evil that even the jungle will not enter. Through history, every attempt to rebuild or resettle Yin has ended in horror. Much of it came from the Sothori, also known as the Brindled Man, the native inhabitants of the continent, but much more damage was done by the diseases: green fever, blood boils, sweet rot, the Red Death, bronze pate, grayscale, brown leg, wormbone, pus eye, sailor's bane, and yellow gum are only a few of the diseases found on the continent. Studies of some of the maesters on these matters suggest that 9 of every 10 men visiting Sothoryos from Westeros will suffer one or more of these afflictions, and that almost half will die. Yet, besides savage brindled men and diseases, there are also other dangers. Massive crocodiles being known to overturn boats in order to devour their occupants afterwards, and swarms of flesh-eating fish infesting local waters afterwards finish the leftovers. Those who survived predator attacks were bothered by stinging flies, venomous snakes and wasps and worms that laid their eggs beneath the skin. Lots of basilisks, fierce venomous reptiles, some twice the size of lions, are found on the Basilisk Point and beyond, and south of Yin there are apes that are said to be so powerful they can slay elephants in one-on-one fight. All of this may sound as a scare story, told in order to frighten the potential fortune seekers, but let's look at the facts. The Freehold of Valyria thrice established colonies on Basilisk Point. The first was destroyed by the savage attacks of the Brindled Man, the second lost to plague and other diseases, and the third was simply abandoned by them in order to withhold captured Zamatar during the Fourth Giscari War. Fortune seekers from Karf sought gold, gems, and ivory along the eastern coast of Sothoryos. Summer Islanders supposedly built their colonies on the west. None have survived the terrible harshness of the Sothoryos. Though one city founded off the coast of the continent even thrived for a longer period of time, the old Empire of Geese founded the city under the name of Gorgai, and the Giscari held Gorgai for between 2 to 4 centuries, until the Valyrian freehold captured it during the Third Giscari War and renamed it Gogossos. The Dragon Lords used it as a penal colony for the worst criminals. New methods of torture were used and blood magic is said to have been practiced there, including slave women being forced to mate with beasts to produce twisted, half-human offspring. Gogossos grew powerful through slavery and sorcery during the Century of Blood, with some calling it the 10th Free City. Its slave markets became as notorious as those of the cities of Slavers Bay. 77 years after the doom of Valyria, however, the Red Death emerged from the slave bands of Gogossos and swept from the Isle of Tears into the rest of the Basilisk Isles. 9 of every 10 men died from the plague. The Basilisk Isles were shunned for a century, until pirates returned. The Carthene pirate Xandaroxor built a black fort at Axile, while the Brotherhood of Bones settled on the Isle of Flies. Thus, in the aftermath of the doom of Valyria, the islands became nests for pirates, who attacked merchants attempting to avoid the Valyrian Peninsula and Smoking Sea. The mud and blood towns of the Basilisk Isles now teem with escaped slaves, slavers, skinners, whores, hunters, brindled men, all the worst of humanity. Pirate towns named Black Pudding, Port Plunder, Stye, and Horsegash spring up now and then and are quickly abandoned, since Volantis and other free cities periodically send fleets to clear out these outlaws, with varying success. If unbothered, pirates grow daring over time, and even those who are supposed to fight the outlaws sometimes turn against the civilization. It is known that Sato's son of Lys was sent to eliminate the pirates at some point in between the reign of Jaehaerys I Targaryen and the War of the Five Kings. But he and his fleet instead turned pirate themselves. He rose to such prominence that he united and reigned the islands as king of the Basilisk Isles for 30 years. The Isle of Tears is the largest of the Basilisk Isles. Steep-sided valleys and black bogs hide amongst the rugged flint hills and twisted, windswept rocks of this island of slavers. There are ruins of an ancient civilization on the Isle of Toads, and the modern inhabitants are believed to descend from those who carved the toadstone. They may be the only remnants of a forgotten race, since they are described as having an unpleasant fish-like aspect to their faces, and many have webbed hands and feet. Similar ancient ruins are found also on the Isle of Tears and Axile. Pirates have heavily fortified Telanile's honeycombed caverns. They gathered there to trade at infamous Barter Beach. The northernmost of the Basilisk Isles is called Skull Island. The small isle is windswept and uninhabited, yet pirates do visit it quite often nonetheless, since many of them decorate the hulls and masts of their ships with severed heads. When the flesh has rotted off them, pirates replace the heads with fresh ones, while the bare skulls are delivered to Skull Isle as an offering to some dog god. Thus, the shores of the island are all lined with skulls. Sothoryos' interior remains a mystery. Slavers, traders, and treasure hunters have visited Sothoryos over the centuries. Fearless explorers and treasure hunters had gone into the vast jungles, never to be seen again. Somehow the stories about the farther south regions of the continent, known as the Green Hell, have survived, however. It is told that beasts even more fearsome are said to dwell there. Pale white vampire bats, tattooed lizards ripping their prey with the long curved claws, while running on their powerful hind legs. Gigantic snakes and spiders are only some of the monsters told of. And then there are the Wyverns, found mostly on Wyvern Point, but not only. Insatiable flying beasts, they are said to be akin of dragons. It's just that they don't spit fire and are smaller. Brindled wyverns grow up to 30 feet long. Swamp wyverns grow even bigger, though they seldom fly far from their lairs. Brown belly wyverns are small. but as they hunt in large packs, they are considered the most dangerous. Although this assumption might be reconsidered by some who had met the Shadow Wing and survived. Pity that these nocturnal monsters are almost invisible as they descend out of the darkness to tear apart the chosen victim. And still, in spite of all the dangers, some small trade towns exist along the northern shore of Sothoryos. Wet and humid and full of misery, those are the true monuments of human stubbornness. The Sothori, also known as the Brindled Men, are massively muscled, big-boned creatures, not men, with long arms, sloped foreheads, huge square teeth, heavy jaws, coarse black hair, flat noses that suggest snouts, and thick skins brindled in patterns of brown and white, making them seem more hog-like than human. Their women cannot breed with any save their own males. When mated with men from Essos or Westeros, they bring forth only malformed stillbirths. The Sothori that dwell closest to the sea have learned the trade talk. The Giscari considered them too slow of wit to make good slaves, but they remain fierce fighters nonetheless. Farther south, the Brindled Men become even more savage and barbaric. They worship dark gods and perform obscene rites. Many are cannibals and some are ghouls, devouring their own dead when they cannot feast on the flesh of foes or strangers. There are reports of other races in Sothoryos that were driven out, destroyed, or devoured by the Brindled Men. Some reports state that Lizard Men and eyeless cave dwellers are the races that survived, however, and still populate the Green Hell. In contrast, Naath Isle seems like a blessing to the travelers. Known as the Isle of Butterflies, it is inhabited by a beautiful and gentle race with round flat faces, dusky skin, and large soft amber eyes. They are called the Peaceful People because they will not fight even in defense of their homes, as they do not kill, not even beasts. The Naath believe in one God, the Lord of Harmony, who has existed and will exist for all time, for he is the source of creation. He is shown as a laughing bearded giant, naked and always surrounded by slender maidens with butterfly wings. Naathi revere butterflies as messengers of the Lord of Harmony, charged with protection of the island and its people. There is some truth to these legends, for strangers from beyond the sea do not live long upon the Isle of Butterflies. The so-called butterfly fever is a disease native to the Isle of Naath and is believed to be transmitted by the local butterflies. Even though the Naathi themselves are immune to this sickness, all outsiders who remain too long on Naath fall prey to it. Fever is the first sign of the disease, followed by painful spasms that make the victims seem to be dancing wildly and uncontrollably. In the last stage, those afflicted sweat blood, and their flesh sloughs from their bones. The Giscari seized the island thrice. The Valyrians erected a fort of fused dragonstone, whose walls survive to the present. A company of Volantine adventurers once built a trade town with timber palisades and slave pens. Pirates of the Basilisk Isles have landed on Naath countless times. All of these invaders fell to the plague. However, pirates long ago learned that the chances of dying of butterfly fever are low, as long as they do not remain on the islands for more than a few hours, and lower still if they land at night, as the butterflies that carry it are day creatures. Thus, slavers often attack Naath during the dark of night, forcing the Naathi inland. Before the slaver raids intensified significantly after the doom of Valyria, the Naathi were involved in long-distance trade networks stretching from Essos to Westeros. Given that the island's environment is well suited for insect life, Naath used to be a major exporter of silk from silkworm caterpillars. The Naathi also exported fine handicrafts and delicate spiced wine. Their shimmering silks could be found in markets throughout the Seven Kingdoms and the Free Cities. The Peaceful People are as clever as they are gentle, beautiful, and quick to learn obedience, and thus are valued greatly. One pillow house on Lys is known for its Naathi girls, who are clad in silk and adorned with colorfully painted butterfly wings. Different from Sothoryos at the first sight, Naath is as deadly as the Green Hell. Who knows, maybe pirates that sail those waters are the wisest of all the adventurers that happen to step on the shores of the deadly continent, and the trick to survive on it is the same as on Naath, not to stay there for too long. Thank you for watching. See ya!